Imagine standing on a stage in Davos, Switzerland. It's January 2026. Outside, the Alps are buried in snow, but inside the Congress Center, the air is even colder. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is at the podium, and he's not there to deliver the usual platitudes about global cooperation. He's there to deliver a eulogy for an era. He leans into the microphone and drops a line that has since become the epitaph for the Canadian dream. In the 21st century, if you aren't at the table, you're on the menu. For the better part of a century, Canada felt safe. We were the middle power, the polite, stable neighbor to the world's only superpower. We thought our seat at the table was permanent, a birthright of geography and shared values. But as Carney's voice echoed through that hall, the irony was painful. The story of 2025 and 2026 isn't just a boring tale of economic recession. It's the story of a nation that essentially dismantled its own leverage, built its entire future on the goodwill of a neighbor that was moving on, and eventually realized it was being served as the main course. Part 2. Architecture of a Trap. How did we get here? You have to understand that Canada's crisis wasn't a sudden accident. It was decades in the making. Since the free trade era of the late 80s and the original NAFTA in '94, we didn't just integrate our economy with the United States, we became a branch plant. By 2024, the numbers were staggering. We were sending 76% of everything we made to one single customer, the U.S. Think about that. Every single day, $2.5 billion in trade flowed across that border. On paper, it looked like a masterpiece of efficiency. In the automotive sector, parts would cross the border 6 or 7 times before a car was finished. Economists called it just-in-time manufacturing, but in reality, it was a hostage situation. We had effectively outsourced our economic sovereignty to Washington, D.C. We ignored the fragility of the system because the money was good. We forgot that a single point of failure is the most dangerous thing in geopolitics, and that failure was about to hit us full force. Part 3. The Great Gold Suicide. Now, if the trade dependency was a slow-motion mistake, what happened with our gold reserves was a frantic act of financial self-sabotage. In the world of high-stakes finance, gold is the ultimate insurance policy. It's the only money that no government can print out of thin air. While countries like China, Russia, and India were buying up every ounce of bullion they could find to hedge against a shaky U.S. dollar, what did Canada do? Between 2015 and 2016, we sold it all. We liquidated 77 tons of gold for a measly $122 million. Fast forward to 2026. Global conflict is everywhere, and gold prices have gone through the roof. Those reserves we dumped for $122 million, they'd be worth over $132 billion today. But it's not just about the money. Canada became the only G7 nation with zero gold. By putting all our eggs in the USD basket, we didn't just trust the Americans with our trade, we trusted them with our literal store of value. When the 2025 crisis hit, we had no exit ramp. We had no independent financial leverage. We were flying a plane with no parachute. In Part 4, the rot inside the house. While the wolves were gathering at the border, the house itself was rotting from the inside. For decades, the Canadian dream was simple: get a job, buy a house, retire. By 2025, that dream was officially dead for an entire generation. In Toronto and Vancouver, the average home price surged past $1.1 million. The government promised housing accords and supply-side fixes, but it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. We had aggressive immigration targets that the infrastructure simply couldn't handle, and we had entrenched interests that made building nearly impossible. Then came the green failures. We put billions of taxpayer dollars into the Northvolt EV battery plant in Quebec. It was supposed to be our ticket to the future. Instead, the Swedish parent company went belly up in late 2025, leaving behind a ghost site and a massive hole in the budget. Then there was the SECU digitization disaster, a simple insurance update that ballooned from $638 million to over $1 billion, only to end in a scandal of rigged bids and a system that crashed constantly. Public trust didn't just decline, it evaporated. People were struggling to pay rent while watching billions vanish into failed government experiments. The stage was set for a political explosion. Part 5. The February Shockwave. The explosion happened on February 1st, 2025. Donald Trump returned to the White House, and he didn't waste any time. Citing uncontrolled borders and trade imbalances, he dropped a 25% blanket tariff on every single Canadian product. Oil and gas got a lucky 10% rate. The continental peace we had enjoyed for decades was gone in a single afternoon. The impact was like a physical blow. The Canadian GDP shrank almost instantly. The loonie, our dollar, didn't just fall, it plummeted. Suddenly, everything from California oranges to American-made tech became prohibitively expensive. By September 2025, unemployment hit 7.1%. Factories were shuttering across Ontario and Quebec. We tried to fight back, of course. We threatened tariffs on $155 billion of American goods. But let's be real. It was David versus Goliath, and David had forgotten his slingshot. We needed their market to survive. They just used our market as a convenience. We were learning the hard way that when the elephant rolls over, the mouse gets crushed. Part 6. The Rise of the Adult in the Room. In the middle of this chaos, we had a leadership vacuum. Justin Trudeau, whose relationship with Trump was already toxic, stepped down in January 2025. He left at the exact moment the country needed a steady hand. Enter Mark Carney. Sworn in as Prime Minister in March 2025, he was billed as the adult in the room. He's a technocrat, a former central banker, the kind of guy who understands the plumbing of the global economy. He tried to play it cool. He tried to negotiate a carve-out for Canada, but Trump wasn't interested in technocratic precision. During the 2025 World Series, an Ontario-based ad campaign had the audacity to criticize U.S. trade policy. Trump, never one to let a slight go, used it as a pretext to walk away from the table entirely. He labeled Canada hostile. Suddenly, even Carney's international prestige couldn't save us from the America First steamroller. Part 7. A House Divided. When people can't afford to eat and the economy is stalling, they start looking for someone to blame. The fault lines of Canada, the ones we usually ignore, started to crack open. First, look at Alberta. The West has felt alienated for a long time, but 2025 was the breaking point. Between U.S. tariffs and federal environmental rules, Alberta felt like it was being strangled from both sides. By the end of the year, a staggering 18% of Albertans were openly talking about annexation, joining the U.S. as the 51st state. Trump, of course, loved this, publicly egging them on. It wasn't just fringe talk anymore. It was a mainstream conversation about the death of the Canadian consensus. Then you have Quebec. The Northvolt collapse and the resignation of Premier François Legault triggered a massive surge for the Parti Québécois. The argument was simple. The federal government can't protect our jobs or our economy from the Americans. Why are we still here? By 2026, Quebec was staring down another referendum. The threat wasn't just political, it was geographical. If Quebec leaves, the Atlantic provinces are physically cut off from the rest of Canada. The map itself was beginning to dissolve. Part 8. The Geopolitical Hostage. In a desperate move to find a new customer, Carney flew to Beijing in January 2026. He tried to pivot. He offered to lower tariffs on Chinese EVs if they would buy our agricultural products. It was a high-stakes gamble to prove we weren't just an American satellite. Washington's response? It was swift, and it was brutal. Trump threatened a 100% tariff on everything Canadian if we signed that deal. He effectively vetoed our foreign policy. Carney had to back down. That moment was the ultimate reality check. It solidified our hostage status. We were too dependent on the U.S. to stay, but they wouldn't let us leave. We were trapped in their orbit, whether we liked it or not. Part 9. The Hard Truths of 2026. The crisis of 2026 isn't just a series of bad headlines. It's a textbook case of what happens when a country ignores the rules of power. We fell for the myth of the reliable partner. We thought being a good neighbor was enough to keep us safe. It wasn't. In a world of rising nationalism, friendship is a luxury. National interest is the only thing that matters. We entered this fight with no bargaining chips. We sold our gold. We integrated our supply chains until we couldn't untangle them, and we let our military capabilities slide. When the U.S. decided to squeeze us, we had nothing to squeeze back. For years, we prioritized values-based foreign policy, talking about climate change and human rights on the world stage. Those are noble goals, but they don't mean much when you're facing a transactional America First leader who only understands leverage. Carney's pivot back to realpolitik was necessary, but it might have been a decade too late. Part 10. Canada versus the world. If you want to see how it could have been different, look at the BRICS nations, Brazil, India, even South Africa. They spent the last decade diversifying. They didn't put all their eggs in the Western basket. They built massive gold reserves. When the U.S. shifted its policies, they had the autonomy to weather the storm, or look at Australia. They're heavily dependent on China, but they've kept a robust military and a diversified energy portfolio. They have room to maneuver. Canada, by contrast, put everything into one single basket and then handed that basket to a neighbor who decided he didn't want to play fair anymore. Part 11. The Two Paths Forward. So here we are in 2026, standing at a crossroads. There are no easy exits. Path A is radical diversification. It means a lost decade. It means enduring high tariffs and economic pain while we frantically build new infrastructure to ship our goods to Europe and Asia. It would require a level of national unity we haven't seen since the 1940s. Path B is subjugation. It means accepting that we are a junior partner. We become a resource colony for the U.S., losing our political autonomy and basically becoming the 51st state in everything but the name on the map. The Carney government is trying to find a middle path, doubling our non-U.S. exports while trying to play nice with Washington. But with Alberta and Quebec pulling in opposite directions, the real question isn't just about the economy anymore. It's about whether the word Canada will even mean the same thing by this time next year. Part 12. A final warning. The tragedy of this crisis is that the wounds were largely self-inflicted. We chose to sell the gold. We chose to ignore the housing bubble until it popped. We chose to build a single-customer economy. The 2025 to 2026 period is a brutal reminder of an old truth from the historian Thucydides. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. For Canada to stop suffering, we have to find the strength to be an independent actor again. If we fail this test, we won't just be a footnote in history books. We'll be a cautionary tale, a story about what happens when a country forgets that in the world of geopolitics, there are no permanent friends. There are only permanent interests. The table is set. The question is, can we find a way to sit at it, or are we just waiting for the next course to be served?